What if the moment you beg for mercy is the moment you discover you're meant to rule them all? Tonight, we dive into a world where hunger leads to destiny, where a desperate girl's plea for food awakens powers that could reshape entire kingdoms. Watch as Lyra discovers that sometimes the greatest strength comes from our deepest vulnerability, and that the Alpha King who claims her as his mate might be the only one who truly sees the fire burning within her soul. This is a story of starvation and abundance, of mockery and worship, of a love so powerful it could either save the world or destroy it completely. If you're ready to feel every heartbeat, every betrayal, every impossible moment when two souls recognize each other across the void of destiny, hit subscribe and let the story begin. The massive oak doors groaned open like the mouth of some ancient beast, revealing the most magnificent sight Lyra had ever witnessed, and the most terrifying. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen stars above marble floors that gleamed with an almost supernatural light, reflecting the faces of dozens of nobles draped in silks and jewels that could have fed her village for a year. The Festival da Lua Cheia was in full swing, and every powerful alpha in the kingdom had gathered to celebrate beneath the castle's soaring arches. But Lyra saw none of the beauty. She saw only the platters of roasted meat, the golden bread, the goblets of wine that seemed to mock her hollow stomach. For 3 weeks, she had survived on berries and stream water, her body growing weaker with each passing day since fleeing the burning remains of her adoptive home. "I just need to work," she told herself, gripping her tattered cloak tighter around her shoulders. "Just work for food, that's all. They can't refuse that." The moment her bare feet touched the polished marble, conversation died like a candle in the wind. Dozens of eyes turned toward her, some curious, some disgusted, all calculating the worth of this scarecrow girl who dared enter their sacred space. Lady Morgana, resplendent in midnight blue silk that matched her cold eyes, was the first to laugh. It started as a delicate tinkle, like silver bells, but quickly spread through the crowd until the entire hall rang with cruel mirth. "Guards!" Morgana's voice cut through the laughter like a blade. "Remove this creature before she stains the floors." But Lyra had come too far to be turned away by shame. She dropped to her knees in the center of the hall, her voice ringing out with desperate clarity. "I can work for food. I'll clean, I'll serve, I'll do anything. Just please, I'm so hungry I can barely stand." The words tore from her throat like prayer and curse combined, and for one impossible moment, the great hall fell completely silent. As laughter erupts around her again, even crueler than before, something strange happens. A golden-eyed figure at the top of the grand staircase stops mid-step, his entire body going rigid as if struck by lightning. But will the Alpha King's sudden interest save her? Or seal her fate in ways she never imagined? Alpha King Kale had been halfway up the stairs when the girl's voice hit him like a physical blow, stopping his heart for one terrifying moment. 28 years of ruling the most powerful werewolf kingdom in existence, and he had never felt anything like the pull that yanked at his chest when he saw her, this broken, desperate creature kneeling on his floors. Her long dark hair fell like a curtain around her face, but when she lifted her head to speak, he caught a glimpse of eyes so violet they seemed to glow with their own inner light. Impossible, he thought, his hand gripping the marble banister until his knuckles went white. The elders had spoken of such eyes in the old prophecies, but he had dismissed them as fairy tales. Now, watching this girl's shoulders shake with hunger and humiliation, something primal and protective roared to life in his chest. Every instinct screamed at him to vault over the railing, to scoop her up and carry her away from these vultures who dared mock what might be. "My mate," the word whispered through his mind like a revelation and a curse. Lady Morgana's voice grew sharper, more vicious. "Look at her. She reeks of the gutter. Probably has fleas." The nobles laughed harder, some throwing scraps of bread at Lyra's feet like she was a stray dog. But Kale noticed something they didn't. The way she held herself despite the degradation, the straightness of her spine even while kneeling, the fire that flickered behind those impossible eyes. She wasn't just hungry, she was fighting something deeper, something that scared her more than starvation. Then it happened. As another wave of mocking laughter crashed over her, Lyra swayed and collapsed forward, her body finally surrendering to weeks of deprivation. But in that moment of weakness, as her forehead touched the cold marble, Something extraordinary occurred. A silver mark at the base of her neck, hidden beneath her tangled hair, began to glow with soft, ethereal light. It lasted only seconds, but Cale saw it, and he knew. "Seraphina," he commanded, his voice cutting through the crowd like thunder. "Take her to the Rose Chamber. Now." As shocked murmurs ripple through the hall and Lady Morgana's face twists with fury, one question burns in everyone's mind. Why would the Alpha King show mercy to a beggar? But Cale knows the truth that will change everything. She's not a beggar at all. Consciousness returned to Lyra like waves lapping at a distant shore. First the sensation of silk against her skin, then the scent of lavender and honey, finally the impossible softness of a mattress that seemed to cradle her like clouds. For a moment, she thought she was dreaming, or perhaps dead, because surely no place this beautiful existed in the same world, where she had spent weeks sleeping on forest floors and begging for scraps. The Rose Chamber lived up to its name, with walls painted in soft blush tones and windows that overlooked gardens where actual roses bloomed in defiance of the approaching winter. But it was the woman sitting beside her bed that truly captured Lyra's attention, elderly but graceful, with silver-streaked hair braided with small crystals, and eyes that seemed to see far more than they should. "Easy, child," Seraphina murmured, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "You've been asleep for nearly a day. Your body needed time to recover from what you've endured." "I don't understand," Lyra whispered, her voice still rough from dehydration. "Why am I here? Why would anyone—" She trailed off, remembering the laughter, the mockery, the way the nobles had looked at her like something to be scraped off their shoes. But Seraphina was studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle, ancient eyes lingering on her hair, her face, her hands with their calluses and old scars. "Tell me about your family, child. Your real family." The question hit like a physical blow, and Lyra felt tears burning behind her eyes. "They're dead. All of them. I have no one. That's why I—" But Seraphina was shaking her head, reaching out to brush Lyra's hair away from her neck with gentle fingers. When those fingers found the mark, the strange silver shape that had always been there, that her adoptive mother had always told her was just a birthmark, Seraphina's gasp was audible. "Blessed Luna," the healer breathed, and for the first time since Lyra had awakened, fear flickered across the woman's features. "Child, do you know what this is? Do you understand what you carry?" Before Lyra could answer, the chamber door opened with a soft click, and the most devastatingly handsome man she had ever seen stepped inside. Golden eyes, sharp cheekbones, and an aura of power that made the air itself seem to thicken. She knew instantly who he was, and her heart began to race for reasons that had nothing to do with fear. As the Alpha King's gaze locks with hers, and something electric passes between them, Seraphina whispers words that will shatter everything Lyra thought she knew about herself. "You're not an orphan, child. You're the lost daughter of the moon goddess herself." But before anyone can explain what that means, angry voices echo from the corridor outside, and Lady Morgana's furious face appears in the doorway. Lady Morgana swept into the Rose Chamber like an avenging angel, her midnight blue gown billowing behind her, and her perfectly coiffed hair quivering with indignation. Behind her marched 3 other noble ladies, their faces masks of carefully controlled outrage. "Cale, what is the meaning of this spectacle?" she demanded, her voice pitched to carry the perfect balance of hurt and authority. "You house a street urchin in chambers reserved for visiting royalty while your future queen stands humiliated before the entire court?" Cale's jaw tightened, and Lyra caught a glimpse of something dangerous flickering in those golden eyes. "Morgana, I've told you repeatedly," he began, but she cut him off with a gesture that spoke of years of familiarity, years of assuming her place by his side. The casual intimacy of it sent an unexpected stab of jealousy through Lyra's chest, followed immediately by confusion. Why should she care who this powerful man chose to court? "Look at her, Kyle." Morgana's voice rose, losing some of its cultured restraint. "She's nothing. A beggar who probably carries disease, who certainly carries shame. How can you risk our kingdom's reputation for whatever pathetic impulse this represents?" Each word was chosen to wound, delivered with the precision of someone who knew exactly how to cut deepest. But as Lyra felt tears burning behind her eyes, something unexpected happened. Kyle moved. One moment he was standing by the door. The next he was between Morgana and the bed, his presence so commanding that even the angry noblewoman took an involuntary step backward. "That's enough." His voice carried the unmistakable ring of absolute authority, the kind that had built kingdoms and toppled empires. "You will not speak of her that way in my presence. Not ever again." The protective fury in his tone sent shivers down Lyra's spine, even as Serafina's hand found her shoulder in a gesture of surprising comfort. But it was what happened next that changed everything. As tension crackled between Kyle and Morgana, as the other noble ladies whispered behind their fans, Lyra felt something stirring deep in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire crackling in the hearth. When she looked up at Kyle, really looked at him, the silver mark on her neck began to tingle, and from the way his eyes widened slightly, the way his breath seemed to catch in his throat, she realized with shocking certainty that he felt it too. As understanding dawns in Kyle's golden eyes, and Morgana's face transforms from anger to something far more dangerous, the cold calculation of a woman who recognizes a true threat, the very air in the rose chamber seems to hum with possibility. But when Serafina whispers urgently, "The awakening has begun," what ancient powers are stirring to life? And why does Morgana's smile suddenly look more like a predator's snarl? The tension in the room shifted like smoke after Morgana and her entourage departed, their angry whispers echoing down the marble corridors. Kyle remained by the window, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the dying light, and Lyra could feel the weight of unspoken words hanging between them. Serafina moved with the quiet efficiency of someone who had served in the palace for decades, preparing a tray of bread, cheese, and honey-sweetened tea that made Lyra's empty stomach clench with desperate hunger. "Eat slowly," Serafina instructed gently, settling the tray across Lyra's lap. "Your body needs time to remember how to process real food." But even as Lyra obediently took small bites of the softest bread she'd ever tasted, her eyes kept drifting to the Alpha King. There was something in his posture, a controlled tension, like a predator holding itself back from something it desperately wanted. When he finally turned from the window, his golden eyes met hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I need to ask you something," Kale said, his voice rougher than before, "and I need you to think carefully before you answer." He moved closer to the bed, and Lyra caught his scent, pine forests and thunderstorms, with an underlying wildness that called to something deep in her bones. "Have you ever felt different? Like you were meant for something more than the life you were living? Like there was a part of you that was always searching for something you couldn't name?" The question hit her like a physical blow, because it was so perfectly, terrifyingly accurate. "Yes," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Always. Even when I was happy with my adoptive family, there was this restlessness, like I was waiting for something, or someone, and I didn't even know what." She set down the piece of bread with trembling fingers. "The night they died, my adoptive mother told me that my real family would come looking for me when the red moon rose. I thought she was delirious from fever, but Serafina's sharp intake of breath made them both look toward her." The elderly healer was staring at Lyra with something approaching awe, her weathered hands pressed to her heart. "Child, when were you born? What month? What phase of the moon?" When Lyra answered, "The winter solstice, under a blood moon," Serafina's eyes filled with tears. "The last daughter of the Silver Moon Pack. We thought you died with your parents 19 years ago." As the truth crashes over her like a tidal wave, she's not just an orphan, but the heir to one of the most powerful bloodlines in werewolf history. Kale steps forward with something that looks suspiciously like reverence in his eyes, but when he reaches for her hand and their skin touches for the first time, the silver mark on her neck blazes with light, and somewhere in the darkness beyond the castle walls, something ancient and hungry begins to stir. What has their connection awakened? And why does the very air suddenly taste of danger? The moment Kale's fingers touched hers, the world exploded into sensation. Not just the warmth of his skin against her palm, but something far more profound, as if every empty space inside her soul suddenly recognized its missing piece. Lyra gasped, her violet eyes widening as images flashed through her mind, running through moonlit forests, the taste of wild freedom on her tongue, and always, the presence of someone running beside her, someone whose heartbeat matched her own. "The mate bond," Serafina breathed, her voice filled with wonder. and no small amount of concern. I've seen it spark before, but never like this. Never with such intensity. She moved closer to examine the silver mark, which was now pulsing with a soft, rhythmic glow that seemed to match Lyra's heartbeat. Your bloodline was always powerful, child, but this is something the prophecies spoke of but never dared hope for. Kyle hadn't released her hand, and Lyra found herself drowning in the golden depths of his eyes. I felt you, he whispered, his voice raw with emotion. Even before I saw you in the Great Hall, I felt something pulling at me, calling me back from the council chambers. I thought I was going mad. His thumb traced gentle circles across her knuckles, and each touch sent electricity racing up her arm. Lyra, I need you to understand. What's happening between us? It's not just attraction. It's destiny. But destiny was a luxury for people who weren't still wearing rags and fighting off starvation. I don't understand any of this, Lyra said, pulling her hand back even though it felt like tearing away part of herself. Yesterday I was begging for scraps, and now you're telling me I'm some kind of lost princess. That we're... She couldn't say the word mates out loud. It was too big, too overwhelming, too impossibly wonderful to be real. The hurt that flashed across Kale's features was quickly replaced by understanding, but Lyra caught it anyway. You think I'm lying, he said softly, or that I'm deluding myself because you're beautiful and mysterious and I want to believe in fairy tales. He stood, running a hand through his dark hair, and for the first time since she'd met him, he looked vulnerable. I don't blame you. If someone had told me a week ago that I would find my mate kneeling on my palace floor, I would have laughed them out of the kingdom. As Serafina quietly excuses herself to fetch more supplies, leaving them alone with the weight of destiny hanging between them, Lyra faces an impossible choice. Embrace a connection that terrifies her with its intensity, or run from the one person who might finally make her feel whole. But when howls echo from the forest beyond the castle walls, howls that sound suspiciously like a hunting call, time for hesitation may be running out faster than either of them realizes. The howls started as distant echoes, like phantoms calling across the wind, but they grew closer with each passing moment until they seemed to vibrate through the very stones of the castle. Lyra felt them in her bones, a primal recognition that sent ice through her veins even as her newly awakened instincts screamed at her to respond. Rogues, Kale growled, his entire body going rigid as he moved to the window. But they never come this close to the castle. Never. Unless they're hunting something specific, Serafina said grimly, as she returned with what was clearly more than medical supplies. The elderly woman was armed with silver daggers and what looked like protective amulets. Lyra, child, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Your awakening sent ripples through the supernatural world. Every creature with an ounce of mystical sensitivity felt it. Panic clawed at Lyra's throat. You're saying this is my fault? That because we... She gestured helplessly between herself and Kale, unable to articulate the magnitude of what had passed between them. How many people are going to die because I couldn't control whatever this thing inside me is? The self-loathing in her voice was sharp enough to cut, and Kale moved toward her instinctively. No, he said firmly, catching her face between his hands with a gentleness that belied his obvious urgency. This is not your fault, Lyra. You didn't choose to be born with this power, and you certainly didn't choose to have it awakened. But now that it has been, we deal with the consequences together. His eyes held hers, fierce and unwavering. I've been preparing for threats to this kingdom my entire life. I won't let anything happen to you. But even as he spoke, the howls grew louder, more organized. This wasn't random violence. It was a coordinated attack. Through the rose-tinted windows, Lyra could see shapes moving between the trees, too large and too fast to be natural wolves. They're not just hunting me, she realized with growing horror. They're using me as bait to draw you out, to weaken the kingdom's defenses. The strategic thinking came naturally, as if some part of her had always understood warfare and tactics. Then we don't give them what they want, Kale replied, but his jaw was tight with the kind of tension that came from choosing between equally terrible options. Serafina, activate the castle's full protection wards. I want every servant, every guest, every soul in this building protected. As the healer nodded and began pulling crystal amulets from her bag, Kale turned back to Lyra with an expression that was part apology, part promise. And you, My brave, stubborn mate are going to stay exactly where you are while I deal with this threat. As Chaol strides toward the door with the lethal grace of a predator preparing for battle, and the sounds of attack grow ever closer to the castle walls, Lyra faces a choice that will define not just her relationship with her mate, but her understanding of her own power. Obey the Alpha King's command to stay safe, or follow the instincts screaming at her that running away has never solved anything. But when the windows suddenly explode inward in a shower of glass and silver claws, the choice may be taken out of her hands entirely. The creatures that burst through the rose chamber windows were nightmares given form. Wolves, but wrong somehow, their eyes glowing with an unnatural red light, and their movements too fluid, too coordinated to be entirely animal. Lyra screamed as razor-sharp claws raked across the silk curtains, but the sound died in her throat when she saw what happened next. Chaol transformed. She had heard about werewolf shifts, of course, but witnessing it was something else entirely. One moment he was standing in human form. The next he was a massive golden wolf, easily twice the size of their attackers, with eyes that blazed like molten sun. He launched himself at the lead rogue with a snarl that shook the chamber walls, and suddenly the elegant room became a battlefield painted in silver and scarlet. "The amulets!" Seraphina shouted over the chaos, pressing a crystal pendant into Lyra's hands. "They'll protect you from direct attack. But child, you need to understand. These aren't ordinary rogues. Someone is controlling them, using dark magic to enhance their strength and speed." Even as she spoke, the elderly woman was moving with surprising agility, silver daggers flashing as she fought alongside Chaol against the supernatural invaders. But it was what happened when one of the rogues broke through their defenses that changed everything. As massive jaws lunged for Lyra's throat, something inside her exploded outward like a star-going supernova. Silver light poured from her skin, and the attacking wolf was thrown backward with such force that it crashed through the opposite wall. The remaining rogues froze, their red eyes reflecting something that looked suspiciously like fear. "Impossible," one of them spoke, its voice a guttural rasp that sounded like grinding stone. The Silver Moon bloodline was extinguished. The last heir died with her parents, its attention fixed on Lyra with predatory intensity. "But the Master will be pleased to know that rumors of your death were greatly exaggerated." "Your Master?" Lyra found her voice, though it trembled with a mixture of fear and fury. "Who sent you? Who killed my family?" The silver light was still radiating from her skin, and she could feel power coursing through her veins like liquid starlight. For the first time in her life, she wasn't running from a fight. She was ready to end one. The rogue's laugh was like breaking glass. "Victor sends his regards, little princess. He's been waiting so patiently for you to awaken, waiting to finish what he started 19 years ago." Before anyone could react, the creature produced a small crystal vial from somewhere in its fur, crushing it between its teeth. Smoke billowed out, acrid and choking, and when it cleared, all the rogues were gone, vanished as if they had never been there at all. As silence falls over the devastated chamber, and Chaol shifts back to human form, his eyes dark with protective fury, one name echoes in the air like a curse: Victor. But who is this mysterious enemy who murdered Lyra's family and now hunts her with such calculated patience? And why does Seraphina's face go pale with something that looks suspiciously like recognition when she hears that name spoken aloud? In the aftermath of the attack, with furniture overturned and tapestries shredded, the Rose Chamber looked like a battlefield from some ancient war. But it was the expression on Seraphina's face that truly shattered the illusion of safety. The elderly healer was staring at the place where the rogues had vanished, with the kind of horror that spoke of old wounds reopened and carefully buried secrets clawing their way back to the surface. "You know who Victor is," Lyra said quietly, her voice cutting through the settling dust like a blade. It wasn't a question. The silver light had faded from her skin, but the power still hummed beneath her surface, making her more perceptive, more attuned to the subtle tensions in the room. "You knew him before tonight, didn't you, Seraphina?" Chaol moved to Lyra's side, his hand finding hers with the natural ease of someone whose entire world had just shifted on its axis. She could feel his wolf still riding close to the surface, golden eyes scanning for threats, even as he struggled to process what he had witnessed. "I've never seen power like that," he murmured, wonder and concern warring in his voice. "The way you threw that rogue across the room, Lyra, that kind of strength should be impossible without years of training. It should be, Serafina agreed, her voice heavy with a sorrow that seemed decades old. She moved to the shattered window, gazing out at the moonlit gardens as if seeing ghosts among the roses. But then, nothing about your bloodline has ever followed conventional rules, child. Your parents could channel moon magic in ways that defied every law of supernatural physics. And Victor was obsessed with understanding how they did it. The pieces were starting to come together, forming a picture that made Lyra's blood run cold. He wasn't just some random enemy, was he? He knew my family personally. She could feel Cale's hand tighten around hers, his warmth anchoring her as her world continued to reshape itself with each revelation. Serafina, please. I need to know what happened to them. I need to know why he's coming for me now. The healer was quiet for so long that Lyra thought she might refuse to answer. When she finally spoke, her words fell like stones into still water, sending ripples of consequence in all directions. Victor was your father's brother, your uncle, and 19 years ago, he murdered his own family because he believed that power like theirs shouldn't exist in the world. She turned from the window, tears gleaming in her ancient eyes. He thought he had killed you too, Lyra, which means now that he knows you survived, as the terrible truth settles over them like a shroud, that Lyra's greatest enemy is her own blood, that the man who destroyed her family will stop at nothing to finish what he started. Cale's protective instincts roar to life, but when distant horns begin sounding from the castle walls, their deep notes carrying a message that makes Serafina's face go white with terror, they realize the night's dangers are far from over. What new threat approaches the castle? And why does the sound of those horns fill even the Alpha King with dread? The war horns hadn't sounded in over a decade, their deep, mournful notes carrying a message that every soul in the castle understood instinctively. Danger beyond the walls, threat to the kingdom, all hands to battle stations. Cale was moving before the final note faded, his mind already shifting into the tactical thinking that had kept his people safe for nearly 10 years of rule. But when he reached for the door, Lyra's voice stopped him cold. I'm coming with you. Her words weren't a request or a plea. They carried the quiet certainty of someone who had just discovered exactly who she was meant to be. The silver light hadn't returned to her skin, but there was something different about her now, a sense of power held in careful check. Don't even think about telling me to stay here and hide while you face whatever's coming. We're mates, Cale. That means we face threats together. Lyra, you don't understand, he began, but she cut him off with a look that was pure alpha authority despite her lack of formal training. The transformation was remarkable. This was no longer the desperate girl who had begged for food in his great hall. This was someone coming into her birthright, and the sight of it was both magnificent and terrifying. No, you don't understand, she replied, moving to stand before him with her chin raised in challenge. For 19 years, I've been running from who I really am. Tonight, I discovered I'm the heir to one of the most powerful bloodlines in our world, that I have an uncle who wants me dead, and that I'm mated to a king. I am done being protected. I am done being hidden away while other people fight my battles. Through the chamber's destroyed windows, they could see torches moving in the courtyard below, warriors assembling with the swift efficiency of a well-trained army. But there was something else visible in the distance, a red glow on the horizon that pulsed like a heartbeat, growing stronger with each passing moment. Serafina joined them at the window, her face grave as she studied the approaching light. Blood moon magic, she whispered, and both Cale and Lyra turned to her with alarm. Victor isn't just coming with rogues and conventional forces. He's drawing power from the lunar cycle itself, using the approaching red moon to amplify whatever dark magic he's learned in the years since. She trailed off, but the implication hung in the air like a death sentence. Since he murdered my parents, Lyra finished quietly. Her hand found Cale's, their fingers intertwining with the natural ease of two souls recognizing their other half. He's had 19 years to plan this, hasn't he? 19 years to study their magic, to figure out how to steal it or corrupt it or turn it against me. The fear in her voice was real, but it was underscored by something stronger, determination, and a growing anger that burned like silver fire. As the red glow on the horizon grows brighter, and the war preparations below reach fever pitch, Lyra faces the first true test of her newfound identity. But when Cale pulls her close and whispers, "Then we make sure he doesn't get the chance to use what he's learned," She realizes that some battles can only be won by embracing exactly who you're meant to be, even if that means walking directly into the darkness that has been hunting you your entire life. The castle's armory was a cathedral of warfare, with weapons ranging from ancient silver-blessed blades to modern tactical gear designed specifically for supernatural combat. Kale moved through the space with practiced efficiency, selecting pieces that would work best for Lyra's untrained but powerful abilities. Silver conducts moon magic better than any other metal, he explained, offering her a pair of curved daggers that seemed to hum with their own inner light. And these were forged by your grandmother during the last Great War. They've been waiting for you. Lyra's fingers closed around the hilts, and immediately she felt the connection, not just to the weapons, but to the generations of powerful women who had wielded them before her. Images flashed through her mind, her grandmother dancing through battle like a silver storm, her great-grandmother standing against impossible odds, a line of warrior queens stretching back through time. I can feel them, she whispered, wonder coloring her voice. All of them. They're still here somehow. The Silver Moon bloodline doesn't just carry power forward, Seraphina said, appearing beside them with arms full of protective amulets and healing supplies. It carries memory, wisdom, the accumulated strength of every woman who came before. Your ancestors are lending you their knowledge, child. Listen to what they're trying to tell you. As she spoke, servants rushed past carrying message scrolls and battle supplies, the entire castle mobilizing with the swift precision of a military installation. But it was what Kale did next that truly took Lyra's breath away. He knelt before her in the center of the armory, pulling an ornate silver circlet from a velvet case that looked like it hadn't been opened in decades. This belonged to my grandmother, he said, his voice thick with emotion. It's the Queen's crown of Lunaris, and I'm offering it to you not because of prophecy or politics, but because you're already my queen in every way that matters. The circlet was beautiful, delicate silver work that looked like captured moonbeams, set with stones that shifted color in the light. But more than its beauty, Lyra could feel the power in it, the weight of responsibility and authority that came with ruling beside the most powerful alpha in the known world. Kale, I don't know how to be a queen, she admitted, even as her hands reached for the crown with an eagerness that surprised her. A week ago I was begging for food, and now you're about to face down the monster who destroyed your family, he replied, settling the circlet on her head with reverence that made her heart skip. I'd say you're adapting remarkably well to new circumstances. The moment the crown touched her temples, something shifted in the very air around them. The silver light returned to her skin, but softer now, more controlled. She was no longer just Lyra the orphan. She was Queen Lyra of the Silver Moon, mate to the Alpha King, and the last hope of a bloodline that had protected their people for centuries. As horns sound again from the walls, this time in greeting rather than warning, and scouts rush in with reports that Victor's army has been sighted on the northern ridge, Lyra realizes that her true test is about to begin. But when Kale takes her hand and leads her toward the great hall where their allies are gathering, she discovers that some crowns aren't just worn. They're earned in battle. And tonight, she'll learn whether she's truly worthy of the legacy she's inherited. The great hall had been transformed from a place of celebration into a war council that would have impressed the greatest military minds in history. Representatives from every major pack in the kingdom had gathered around a massive oak table covered with maps, battle plans, and communication crystals that glowed with messages from the front lines. But it was the moment Lyra entered, crowned and radiating silver light, that the room fell into stunned silence. Alphas of Lunaris, Kale's voice carried the unmistakable ring of absolute authority. I present to you Queen Lyra of the Silver Moon, my mate and your rightful co-ruler. The reactions were immediate and varied. Some faces showed awe, others skepticism, and a few displayed the careful neutrality of politicians calculating which way the wind was blowing. But it was Alpha Marcus of the Northern Reaches who spoke first, his grizzled features creased with something that might have been relief. We felt the awakening 3 days ago, he said, inclining his head in a gesture of respect that rippled through the assembled leaders. Every wolf with a connection to the old magic felt it. Some of us hoped, but we didn't dare believe the Silver Moon line still lived. His eyes met Lyra's directly, and she caught a glimpse of old pain there, the weight of decades spent fighting battles that might have been easier with her family's power to call upon. But not everyone was prepared to accept her so readily. Alpha Helena of the Eastern Cliffs stepped forward, her sharp features twisted with doubt. "Forgive me, Your Majesty." The title dripped with barely concealed sarcasm. "But we have only your word that this girl is who you claim. For all we know, she could be one of Victor's agents, sent to infiltrate our defenses before the real attack begins." The accusation hit the room like a thunderclap, and Lyra felt every eye turn toward her with new suspicion. But instead of the fear and self-doubt that would have consumed her a week ago, she felt something else rising, a calm certainty that came from finally knowing exactly who she was. "You want proof?" she asked quietly, stepping away from Kyle's protective presence to stand alone before the assembled alphas. "Then you'll have it." She closed her eyes and reached for the power that had been growing stronger with each passing hour. This time, instead of explosive force, she called for something subtler, the ability to sense the truth in people's hearts, to separate friend from enemy, with the intuitive wisdom that had kept her ancestors alive through countless wars. When she opened her eyes again, they blazed with silver fire, and her voice carried harmonics that seemed to resonate in the very bones of everyone present. "Alpha Helena, you question my identity because you lost your mate to one of Victor's raids 5 years ago, and you're terrified of hoping for salvation only to be betrayed again. Alpha Marcus, you believe because your grandmother told you stories of my great-grandmother's power, and you've been waiting your entire life for the silver moon to rise again. Alpha James," her gaze fixed on a younger man near the back of the room, "you're not here to help at all. You're here to report our battle plans back to my uncle." As gasps of shock and the scrape of weapons being drawn fill the great hall, and the traitor Alpha James reaches for a communication crystal with desperate speed, Lyra realizes that her first act as queen will be stopping a betrayal that could doom them all. But when James's crystal begins to glow with message-sending magic, and Victor's voice echoes from it with mocking laughter, she discovers that some traps have already been sprung, and the real battle is about to begin, whether they're ready or not. Victor's laughter poured from the shattered crystal like poison, rich and cultured and utterly without warmth. "My dear little niece." His voice seemed to caress each word with mockery. How delightfully dramatic. "I must say, your performance just now was quite impressive, very much like your mother when she thought she was being clever." The casual cruelty in his tone made several alphas growl, but Lyra felt ice settle in her veins as she recognized the implications. "You've been listening this entire time," she said, her voice steady despite the fury building in her chest. Around the great hall, warriors were drawing weapons and moving to defensive positions, but she kept her attention focused on the voice of the man who had destroyed her world. "James wasn't just reporting to you. You've been inside our war council from the beginning." "Oh, my clever girl," Victor purred, and the pride in his voice was somehow more disturbing than his threats. "You're so much like your father when he was young, always thinking 3 moves ahead, always believing he could outmaneuver the darkness. It didn't save him, of course, but it made him entertaining, right up until the end." The casual reference to her parents' murder sent silver fire racing along Lyra's skin, but before she could respond, the hall's massive windows exploded inward. This time, the creatures that poured through weren't just rogues. They were something far worse. Humans who had been twisted by dark magic, their eyes glowing with the same red light as the approaching blood moon, their movements too fast and too coordinated to be natural. Behind them came wolves the size of horses, their fur black as midnight, and their fangs dripping with something that hissed when it hit the stone floors. "Shadow touched," Seraphina breathed, horror evident in her voice as she pressed protective amulets into the hands of nearby fighters. Victor's learned to corrupt the bond between human and wolf. These creatures feel no pain, no fear, no mercy. They'll fight until they're utterly destroyed. Even as she spoke, the elderly healer was moving with surprising agility, silver daggers appearing in her hands as if from nowhere. The battle erupted with the fury of a natural disaster. Kale shifted into his massive golden wolf form, leading the charge against the shadow touched with lethal grace, while the assembled alphas fought with the coordinated precision of leaders who had trained together for decades. But it was Lyra who became the focal point of the chaos, silver light pouring from her skin as she wielded her grandmother's daggers with instinctive skill that should have taken years to develop. "Impressive, little princess," Victor's voice continued to echo from hidden speakers throughout the hall. calm and conversational despite the carnage below. But this is merely the opening movement. You see, I've spent 19 years studying your family's power, learning to corrupt it, to turn it against itself. And now, his laughter rose above the sounds of battle like a death knell. Now I'm going to show you exactly what your precious Silver Moon legacy looks like when it's been properly refined. As the words fade into something that sounds suspiciously like an incantation, and the blood moon visible through the shattered windows begins to pulse with unnatural intensity, Lyra feels something cold and invasive trying to claw its way into her mind. Victor isn't just attacking their bodies, he's attacking the very source of her power. But when Kale's mental voice reaches her through their mate bond, strong and fierce and utterly unshakable, she realizes that some connections are too powerful for even corrupted magic to break. The attack on her mind felt like ice-cold claws scraping against her soul, Victor's corrupted magic trying to twist her silver power into something dark and destructive. Lyra could feel him probing her memories, her fears, searching for the weakness that would let him turn her into a weapon against everything she loved. "You cannot resist forever, child," his voice whispered directly into her thoughts. "I am family. I am blood, and blood calls to blood." But even as the dark magic pressed against her defenses, she felt something else, warm and golden and utterly unbreakable. Kale's presence in her mind through their mate bond, his strength flowing into her like sunlight-piercing storm clouds. "I'm here." His mental voice was fierce with protective love. "You're not alone, Lyra. You're never going to be alone again." The connection between them blazed brighter than the blood moon overhead, and she felt Victor's attack falter for the first time. In the physical world, the battle raged with supernatural fury. The shadow-touched creatures fought with mindless savagery, but the assembled alphas were holding their ground, their coordinated attacks slowly wearing down the enemy numbers. Seraphina moved through the chaos like an avenging angel, her silver daggers leaving trails of purifying light that actually seemed to heal the corrupted creatures, rather than simply destroying them. "That's it!" Lyra gasped aloud, understanding flooding through her like revelation. "He's not creating these monsters. He's corrupting people who already exist. They're victims, not enemies." The realization changed everything. Instead of fighting to kill, she began fighting to heal, her silver light reaching out to touch the shadow-touched creatures and burn away the darkness that had been forced upon them. One by one, the twisted beings began to change. The red glow faded from their eyes, replaced by confusion and pain as their humanity returned. Some collapsed, overwhelmed by the horror of what they had been forced to do. Others immediately turned to fight against the remaining corrupted creatures, their fury at being used as weapons lending them supernatural strength. Impossible. Victor's voice had lost its mocking confidence, replaced by something that sounded almost like fear. "The Silver Moon power is meant to destroy the darkness, not redeem it. You cannot simply heal what I have perfected." But even as he spoke, Lyra could feel his mental attack weakening, his concentration divided between controlling the remaining shadow-touched and trying to corrupt her power. It was Kale who delivered the final blow to Victor's strategy. Moving with inhuman speed, he reached the hidden communication array that had been broadcasting Victor's voice throughout the hall. Instead of simply destroying it, he did something far more clever. He reversed the connection, turning Victor's own spell back on itself. Suddenly, every word of dark magic Victor had been using to maintain control over his corrupted army was being broadcast to the creatures themselves, breaking his hold over them one by one. As the last of the shadow-touched creatures shake off their corruption and the great hall falls into an exhausted but victorious silence, Lyra realizes that this was never about defeating Victor in conventional battle. It was about proving that love and healing are more powerful than hatred and corruption. But when the blood moon overhead suddenly blazes with blinding intensity, and Victor's furious roar echoes across the kingdom like thunder, she understands that the real confrontation is just beginning. Victor appeared like a nightmare given form, stepping through a portal of swirling darkness that opened in the center of the great hall. He was tall and imposing, with the same aristocratic features that marked him as family, but his eyes burned with the same red light as the blood moon overhead. The shadows seemed to cling to him like living things, and when he smiled, Lyra caught a glimpse of fangs that belonged to no natural wolf. "Hello, brother," he said, his gaze finding Kale with mocking familiarity. "It's been what, 10 years since you banished me? You look well. Ruling agrees with you." The casual tone was belied by the malevolent power radiating from him in waves, making the very air feel thick and poisonous. "And little Lyra, my, how you've grown. The last time I saw you, you were barely speaking. Now look at you, a queen, apparently." "I remember you," Lyra said quietly, her grandmother's daggers steady in her hands despite the memories flooding back. A kind uncle who told wonderful stories, who brought gifts, and made her parents laugh, before he became a monster. "You used to bring me silver bells that chimed with moon music. You taught me to braid flower crowns." The pain in her voice was raw and real. "Why? Why did you destroy everything beautiful in your life?" For just a moment, something flickered across Victor's features. Regret, perhaps, or the ghost of the man he used to be. "Because beauty dies, child. Love fades. Power is the only thing that endures." He gestured, and shadows erupted from the floor, reaching for her with grasping tendrils. "Your parents thought their love could protect them, their precious mate bond, their perfect family. I showed them how wrong they were, but the shadows never reached her. Kale was there, his own power blazing like golden fire as he intercepted the attack. Around them, the assembled alphas formed a protective circle, but Lyra could see the fear in their eyes. This wasn't just a rogue alpha or a corrupted creature. This was something that had abandoned its humanity entirely in pursuit of power. "The blood moon gives me strength beyond anything you can imagine," Victor continued, his form growing larger and more monstrous with each word. "I have spent decades learning to channel its power, to become something more than the weak, loving fool I used to be. And now I will finish what I should have done 19 years ago." The final battle erupted with world-shaking fury. Victor fought like a force of nature, shadows and corrupted moon magic pouring from him in waves that cracked the very foundations of the castle. But Lyra and Kale fought as one, their mate bond allowing them to anticipate each other's movements, to share strength and power in ways that multiplied their individual abilities. "You cannot win," Victor roared as silver and gold light pushed back his darkness. "I am family. I am blood. The power flowing through your veins came from the same source as mine." But even as he spoke, Lyra could see the truth he refused to acknowledge. His power was borrowed, stolen, corrupted. Hers was given freely, shared willingly, strengthened by love rather than diminished by it. "You're right," she said, her voice carrying across the hall with supernatural clarity. "We are family, which means I understand you better than you think." She lowered her daggers, opening herself completely to his attack. "I know why you really killed them, Uncle. It wasn't because you thought love was weakness. It was because you were jealous that they had something you thought you could never find." As Victor's attack falters in the face of her unexpected vulnerability, and the blood moon overhead begins to fade toward normal silver, Lyra makes the choice that will define not just this battle, but the future of her entire kingdom: to heal rather than destroy, to offer redemption rather than revenge. But will her uncle's corrupted heart be capable of accepting the forgiveness she's offering? Or will this final gamble cost her everything she's fought to protect? The silence that followed Victor's collapse was profound, broken only by the distant sound of birds beginning their dawn chorus beyond the shattered windows. He lay crumpled in the center of the great hall, no longer the towering monster of shadow and corruption, but simply a broken man whose quest for power had cost him everything that made life worth living. The red glow had faded from his eyes, replaced by something Lyra hadn't seen there in decades: tears. "I can't take it back," he whispered, his voice raw with 2 decades of suppressed grief. "All of it. Your parents, the people I've hurt, the darkness I've spread. I can't undo any of it." His hands shook as he looked at them, as if seeing the blood on them for the first time. "I told myself it was about power, about strength, but you were right. I was just so alone, and I couldn't bear watching everyone else have what I'd lost." Lyra knelt beside him, her silver light now soft and warm rather than blazing with battle fury. "Alone doesn't have to mean evil, Uncle. Grief doesn't have to mean destruction." She reached out, hesitating only briefly before taking his hand in hers. "The mate bond can't be forced or stolen. I know that now. But family can be rebuilt, even after it's been broken. You would forgive me?" The hope in his voice was fragile as spun glass, as if he didn't dare believe in the possibility. After everything I've done, everything I've destroyed. Around them, the assembled alphas watched in stunned silence as their new queen offered mercy to the monster who had terrorized their lands for decades. I would give you the chance to earn forgiveness, Lyra corrected gently. The chance to spend whatever years you have left healing instead of hurting. It won't be easy, and it won't erase the past, but she looked up at Kale, seeing understanding and support in his golden eyes. But everyone deserves the opportunity to choose love over fear, even you. 6 months later, the gardens of Lunaris Castle had been transformed into something from a fairy tale, with silver and gold decorations woven through the rose arbors, and hundreds of guests from every corner of the supernatural world gathered to witness the formal coronation of their new queen. Lyra stood before the ancient altar where countless rulers had been crowned, but this ceremony felt different, not just a transfer of power, but a celebration of hope renewed. Do you, Lyra of the Silver Moon, swear to rule with wisdom, to protect with strength, and to lead with love? The elder's voice carried across the assembled crowd, but Lyra's attention was focused on Kale, whose eyes held promises of forever. Behind them, a small group of newly healed former rogues stood as honor guards, Victor among them, his face still marked by sorrow, but no longer twisted by hatred. I do, she replied, her voice strong and clear. As the elder placed the crown of queens upon her head, not just Kale's grandmother's circlet, but the true crown of her bloodline, recovered from the ruins of her family's estate, silver light poured from her like liquid starlight. But this time, instead of battle magic, it carried the warmth of healing, of new beginnings, of a future bright with possibility. The celebration that followed lasted 3 days, with delegations arriving from kingdoms that had been isolated for generations, all drawn by the news that the Silver Moon had risen again. Children played in the gardens, while their parents discussed trade agreements and mutual defense pacts. Former enemies shared meals and stories, united by the understanding that some things, love, family, hope, were more powerful than any darkness that sought to divide them. Do you ever miss it? Kale asked, as they stood together on their private balcony, watching the stars emerge in the clear night sky. The simplicity of your old life, when your biggest worry was finding your next meal? Lyra leaned into his warmth, her hand resting over her heart, where she could feel the steady pulse of their mate bond. Sometimes, she admitted. But then, I remember what I was really hungry for back then. Not just food, but belonging, purpose, love. She turned in his arms, violet eyes meeting gold in the starlight. I may have been begging for scraps, but what I really found was everything I never dared to dream I could have. And what's that? He murmured, though his smile suggested he already knew the answer. Home, she whispered against his lips as he leaned down to kiss her. I found home. In the distance, a new moon rose, not red with blood and corruption, but silver with hope and healing. The girl who had once knelt in a palace hall, begging for food in exchange for work, was now a queen whose power had transformed not just her own life, but the lives of everyone around her. She had learned that true strength came not from the ability to destroy one's enemies, but from the courage to heal them. And in a world where darkness had seemed to be winning, she had chosen to be the light that showed others the way home. Sometimes the greatest magic isn't in grand gestures of power, but in the simple act of believing that even the most broken things can be made whole again. And sometimes, the person who asks for the smallest kindness is destined to give the greatest gifts in return. For Lyra had asked only for food, but what she gave the world was so much more. She gave them hope, healing, and the reminder that love, true love, really can conquer all.